What's up, RotoBallers? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jorden Hill, and I'm back to discuss some players that didn't show up for your fantasy teams in Week 13 and may have been underwhelming for the past few weeks. As always, we'll talk about what to do with these guys, if you need to drop them, if you need to just bench them for now, or keep rolling with them. But first, make sure you subscribe to RotoBaller to keep up to date with all of our latest content as we head into the fantasy playoffs. Let's start things off with a unanimous first-round running back, Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. King Henry had his worst fantasy performance of the season against the Eagles on Sunday, totaling just 38 yards on 11 carries and 2 receptions. Henry was less than stellar for fantasy last week as well, and this now marks 4 consecutive games in which he's averaged less than 4 yards per carry, so needless to say, he's struggling a bit on the ground right now. This matchup against the Eagles did look okay on paper, but Philadelphia got rookie Jordan Davis back for this contest, and I think he was an important factor for their run defense. Also, the Titans found themselves down early in this one, and it eventually turned into a blowout as the offense really couldn't get anything going. They gave Julius Chestnut his first opportunities of the season, and Malik Willis even took some snaps under center. In my weekly trade targets column over on RotoBaller.com, I actually advocated trading for Derrick Henry heading into this week. It didn't work out right away, but if you look at his schedule over the next 3 weeks, it's an absolute dream for running backs. He plays the Jaguars, the Chargers, and then the Texans, which all rank in the top 8 easiest matchups for fantasy running backs this season. Basically, I wouldn't panic about Derrick Henry. Keep firing him up in your starting lineup, and if your league doesn't have a trade deadline, I recommend buying low for the fantasy playoffs. Another running back you might be worried about is Antonio Gibson of the Washington Commanders. Things seem to be trending upwards for Gibson back in Week 11 when he saw 18 carries, but he's only seen 9 in each of the past 2 games, and the receiving output hasn't been great either. It's clear that the Commanders want Brian Robinson Jr. to lead the way in the backfield, and the team's upcoming schedule will make Gibson difficult to trust in fantasy lineups. They have a bye next week, and then they'll have a rematch against the Giants in Week 15, followed by a face-off with the league's toughest run defense in the San Francisco 49ers in the fantasy semifinals. Washington will get a soft matchup against the Cleveland Browns in Week 17, but the point still stands. I don't think Gibson looks like an enticing option for the fantasy playoffs. Even with J.D. McKissic on injured reserve, he's barely out-targeting Brian Robinson on a weekly basis, and I think he's better left on your bench until we actually see something change on the field. There were a lot of big-time performances for fantasy wide receivers this week, and outside of injuries, I really don't think there were that many that you should have been disappointed with, but one that we will talk about is AMARI Cooper of the Cleveland Browns. He's been one of the best values in fantasy drafts this season, but he turned 9 targets into just 4 receptions for 40 yards in Deshaun Watson's regular season debut against the Houston Texans. Believe it or not, the Texans have been one of the most difficult opponents for fantasy quarterbacks and wide receivers in 2022, and Deshaun Watson definitely looked rusty in his first game in almost 2 years. Cleveland will have another tough test against the Bengals next week, but the schedule will really open up for Cooper in the fantasy playoffs with matchups against the Ravens, the Saints, and the Commanders. With that being said, I think you can continue to roll with him as a fantasy wide receiver 2 in your starting lineup and expect Watson to improve down the stretch. Again, I really don't think there were many panic-inducing receiver showings this week, so let's move over to the tight end position, starting with Tyler HIGBEE. HIGBEE got off to a nice start this season, seeing a lot of target volume, but his production has really fallen off in recent weeks. I thought he would be okay even without Matt Stafford at quarterback, just due to the lack of healthy receiving threats on this offense, but it hasn't been the case. HIGBEE was a total goose last week, earning 0 targets, and he finished with just 2 receptions for 14 yards in a really good matchup against the Seahawks in Week 13. At this point, I would rather take a shot on a tight end in a productive offense, and with Matt Stafford likely done for the rest of the season, I think it's safe to drop HIGBEE in all redraft formats. Finally, let's talk about Mark Andrews, because he really just hasn't been his dominant self lately. With Lamar Jackson dealing with a knee injury, I could understand why some may be concerned. Jackson could miss some time, but before you panic, let's take a look at what Andrews was able to do with Tyler Huntley under center last season. Huntley started 5 games for the Ravens in 2021, and in them, Andrews averaged almost 18 half PPR fantasy points per game, and he drew double-digit targets in 4 of 5 contests. Hopefully Lamar is back sooner rather than later, but it's pretty obvious that Huntley loves targeting Andrews, so I think he's going to be fine either way. I've mentioned it before, there are just so few reliable options at the tight end position, so you've got to keep rolling with Andrews as a high-end starter in your lineup every single week. That's all I got for this week. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, and comment down below what players are starting to concern you as we head into Week 14. Thanks again for tuning in, and best of luck in your fantasy matchups.